The auctioneer's gavel fell with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silent, sterile conference room. "Sold," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "to the Phoenix Group for $300,000. And in that moment, I, Catherine Vance, the woman my son-in-law had bankrupted, became the proud new owner of his failed company. The very company he had built by destroying me. Hi everyone. I'm Grandma Katherine. My name is Catherine Vance. I am 79 years old, and I am from a beautiful, historic corner of coastal New England. This is a story I have held in my heart like a burning coal for 2 years. It's a story of a betrayal so complete, so cleverly disguised as progress and opportunity, that I almost didn't see it until it had consumed my entire world. My own children, my other son, and my daughter, they think their sister's marriage simply fell apart under financial pressure. They don't know the truth. They don't know that their brilliant, charismatic brother-in-law, a man they all admired, was a con artist who saw my life savings not as a widow's security, but as venture capital for his own grand ambitions. He didn't just take my money. He took my home, my security, and my trust. He made me feel like a foolish, irrelevant old woman who was standing in the way of the future. He thought my kindness was weakness. He thought my grief was an opportunity. He forgot who my husband was, and he forgot who that made him. This is the story of how I stopped being his victim and became his final, most unexpected investor. Before I begin this painful recounting, I would be so grateful for your strength. Please, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. To know that you are out there, listening and bearing witness, gives me the courage to finally tell the story of how I lost everything, and then, in the dark, found the strength to take it all back. To understand the company I bought, you must first understand the company I kept for 51 years. My life, my real life, began and ended with my husband, Richard. I married Richard Vance in 1964. He wasn't a loud man or a flashy man. He was a man of quiet, formidable intelligence. He was an engineer who started a small manufacturing company in his garage, a company that designed and built specialty components for the aerospace industry. He was a builder. He believed in things that were meticulously designed, flawlessly executed, and built to last. His mind was a beautiful, intricate machine, and his integrity was the bedrock upon which he built everything. His business, our home, our life. Our life together was a partnership. I was a literature teacher, but he treated me like the chairman of his board. He would spread his blueprints out on our dining room table, and we would talk for hours about his designs, about the market, about his employees. He valued my perspective, not because I understood the complexities of engineering, but because I understood people. He handled all our finances, of course, with the same precision he used to machine a new part. He built a fortress of security around me, a world where I never had to worry about a bill or a balance sheet. His love was not in poetry. It was in a perfectly balanced portfolio. "Catherine," he'd say, "I build things that are strong. My business, this house, our future, it's all built to last." Our daughter, Anna, was born in 1972. She was our greatest joy. She was a sweet, gentle, artistic soul. She had my love for the arts and his kind heart, but none of his analytical rigor. She was a creature of pure emotion, a beautiful, sensitive girl who always saw the very best in everyone. It was her most lovely quality and her most dangerous flaw. She loved her father, but I don't think she ever truly understood the quiet, steely strength that powered his gentle nature. When Richard passed away from a sudden stroke 6 years ago, the architect of my world was gone. The fortress he had built still stood, but its master was gone, and I was left alone in its vast, silent halls. The grief was a disorienting fog, and the financial empire he had so carefully managed became a terrifying foreign landscape to me. Anna was my solace. She was in her late 30s, happily married, or so I thought. She was a constant, loving presence. And it was through Anna that the serpent entered my garden. Her husband, Mark. I had known Mark for years, of course. He and Anna had been married for a decade, and I had always liked him. He was a force of nature. He was handsome, incredibly charismatic, and radiated an aura of boundless ambition and optimism. He was a tech entrepreneur, always talking about his next big idea, his vision for the future. He was the sun, and my gentle Anna was a planet, happily caught in his powerful orbit. He was everything my quiet, steady Richard was not, and I thought his energy was exciting, a sign of the new world. After Richard's death, Mark stepped into a new role. He became my self-appointed protector, my financial guide. "Katherine," he said to me one day, his voice a perfect symphony of compassion and competence. "Richard was a genius in his world, but it's a different world now, a world of fast growth, of innovation. You're sitting on a mountain of assets that are just sleeping. Let me help you. Let me make Richard's legacy work for you, for Anna, for our family's future." He was so convincing. He spoke with such passion, such certainty. He wasn't talking about spending money. He was talking about building, about creating. He made it sound like an honor to my husband's memory. My son-in-law, the visionary, wanted to take my husband's old world fortune and transmute it into a new world empire. It sounded logical. It sounded exciting. Anna, of course, was his biggest cheerleader. "Mom, Mark is brilliant," she'd say, her eyes shining with adoration. "He sees the future. Dad was a builder, and Mark is a builder, just in a different way. You should trust him." And so, in my fog of grief, in my ignorance, in my desire to believe that my family had my best interests at heart, I agreed. I signed the papers that gave him a general power of attorney over my financial affairs. I signed the documents that consolidated my carefully curated, slow-growth stocks into a single account that he would manage. I handed over the keys to my husband's fortress to a man who promised to build me a gleaming new castle. I had no idea he was just salvaging the stones to build a monument to himself. The first year was a whirlwind of excitement. Mark's new company, a tech startup called Innovate, was always on the verge of a breakthrough. He would show me glossy presentations filled with charts and graphs I didn't understand, talking about user acquisition, burn rates, and seed funding. He was paying himself a large salary from the company, a company funded entirely by my money. "You have to pay for top talent, Katherine," he'd explain. And right now, I'm the top talent. Their lifestyle began to change dramatically. They moved into a huge, modern house. A new Tesla appeared in the driveway. Their vacations became more extravagant. When I would raise a gentle question, the answer was always the same. "We have to project success, Katherine," Mark would say patiently. "You can't attract big investors if you look like you're running a company out of your garage. This isn't an expense, it's a marketing strategy." He was so smooth, so convincing. He made it all sound like a necessary part of a brilliant plan. And Anna was always there, echoing his words, her belief in him absolute. I, the simple literature teacher, was made to feel like a relic, a nervous old woman who just didn't understand the high-stakes world of modern business. I began to doubt myself. Maybe he was a genius. Maybe this was how fortunes were made now. The first real crack in the facade appeared about 2 years into his management. He came to me, his face for once not beaming with confidence, but tight with a controlled stress. "Katherine," he said, "we have an incredible opportunity. We're on the verge of landing a huge government contract, but our competitors are trying to undercut us. I need to make a big move. I need to hire a team of expensive engineers, and I need to do it now." He needed more money. A lot more. He explained that he needed to liquidate the last of my blue-chip stocks, the ones from old, reliable companies that had paid dividends for 50 years, the very heart of Richard's portfolio. "It's a short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain," he said. "Once we land this contract, we'll be worth 10 times this. It's the final push." A cold, sick feeling settled in my stomach. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "those stocks, they were your father-in-law's pride and joy. They were my security." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of impatience, of contempt in his eyes. It was gone in a second, replaced by his usual charming smile. "And I am making that security 100 times stronger," he said. "Do you trust me, Catherine?" I looked at my daughter, Anna, who was looking at me with pleading eyes. "Please, Mom," she whispered. "Trust him." So I signed the papers. I signed away the last remnants of my husband's careful, steady world and traded it for my son-in-law's brilliant, risky future. The new engineers were hired. The spending increased. But the government contract never materialized. His excuses were vague: bureaucratic red tape, political maneuvering, but the money was gone. The next visit was more urgent. The company was hemorrhaging money, he said. He needed another infusion of cash, or everything would collapse. There were no more stocks to sell. There was only one asset left: the house. My home. The one I had shared with Richard for 50 years. "It's just a temporary measure," he explained, his voice smooth and reassuring again. "We'll take out a line of credit against the equity in the house. It's a fantastic asset just sitting there, doing nothing. We'll use the funds to bridge us to the next round of financing. I'm already in talks with venture capitalists. Once they see our new prototype, the money will pour in. We'll pay back the line of credit in 6 months. Once they see our new prototype." This was a line too far. "No, Mark," I said. "Not the house. This house it's all I have left of him." His face hardened. The mask fell away completely. "Don't be a sentimental old fool, Catherine," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "It's not a memory. It's an under-leveraged asset. It's the only thing standing between me and ruin, between your daughter and ruin. Are you going to let your sentimentality destroy your own child's future?" He was a cornered animal, and he was baring his teeth. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. And my son, my weak, terrified son, just stood there, wringing his hands, a silent statue of cowardice. I refused. For a week, I refused. The house became a cold, silent war zone. Until finally, he played his trump card. He brought Anna to me. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She was pregnant with their first child. "Mom," she sobbed, her hand on her stomach. "Please, do this for me. Do this for your grandchild. Mark says we'll lose everything. We'll be homeless. Please, Mom, don't let that happen to my baby." He used her. He used my own unborn grandchild as a human shield. It was the most masterful, most cruel piece of emotional blackmail I had ever witnessed. And it worked. I signed the papers. I took out a massive line of credit on my fully paid-off home. I gave him the money. I had now, officially, bet my entire world on his vision. I had taken the fortress my husband had built, brick by loving brick, and I had handed the keys, the deed, and now a battering ram, to the enemy. And I had done it with a pen, and with a mother's broken heart. The moment I signed away the equity in my home, a strange, tense quiet descended upon our lives. It was the quiet of a gambler who has pushed all their chips into the center of the table and is now just waiting for the final card to be turned. Mark was energized, a whirlwind of frantic activity, always on his phone, always talking about the deal that was just around the corner. Anna was a nervous wreck, her pregnancy doing little to soften the new, hard lines of fear around her eyes. And I was just a spectator at my own execution, praying for a miracle. The money from the line of credit, a sum that could have allowed me to live in comfort for the rest of my life, vanished in less than 6 months. It was a bonfire of epic proportions. There were essential business trips to Silicon Valley, strategic dinners at the most expensive restaurants in Boston, and a necessary rebranding of the company complete with a new, incredibly expensive office space they couldn't afford. Mark was no longer projecting success. He was performing a desperate, frantic imitation of it, hoping someone would believe the performance and give him more money. No one did. The venture capitalists he was so sure about never materialized. The big contracts remained stubbornly unsigned. The company, Innovate, was not innovating. It was dying. And it was taking my husband's entire legacy with it. I lived in a constant state of low-grade terror. Every time the phone rang, my heart would leap into my throat. The mail became a source of dread. I was no longer given access to any of the financial information, but I wasn't stupid. I could see the signs. The way Mark's confident bluster was replaced by a brittle, defensive anger. The way Anna would cry quietly in her room at night. The way they would have hushed, vicious arguments that would stop the second I entered a room. The decline was not a slow, gentle slope. It was a cliff, and we were all driving towards it at full speed. I tried to talk to my daughter. I found her in the kitchen one afternoon, her face pale, staring blankly at a pile of bills on the counter. "Anna, honey," I began, my voice gentle. "What's going on? You can talk to me." She looked at me, and her eyes were empty. The bright, loving light that had been her defining feature was gone. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom," she said, her voice flat. "Everything is fine. Mark has a plan." She was a soldier, repeating the last order she had been given, even as she heard the sound of the approaching enemy tanks. She had chained herself to his sinking ship, and she was determined to go down with it, believing in her captain until the very end. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I will never forget it. Mark had been gone for 3 days, on a last-ditch trip to meet with a potential investor. He came home late in the afternoon. I knew from the moment he walked in the door that it was over. His face was gray, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He didn't speak. He just walked into the living room, sat down in my husband's armchair, a violation that no longer even registered, and stared into space. Anna followed him, her face a mask of terror. "Mark, what happened? Did you get it?" He just shook his head, a slow, dead movement. "It's over, Annie," he whispered. "It's all over. They're not investing. No one is. The company, it's worthless." "No," she breathed. "No, you can fix it. You always fix it. There's nothing to fix." He suddenly roared, leaping to his feet, his face a terrifying mask of rage and self-pity. "It's gone. The money is gone. All of it. The line of credit is maxed out. The accounts are empty. The payroll is due on Friday, and there's nothing to pay them with. We're ruined." Anna began to sob, those dry, racking sobs of someone who has finally been forced to face a truth they have been denying for months. And then he turned his rage on me. "This is your fault," he spat, his finger pointing at me, his face contorted. "This is all your fault." I was stunned. "My fault? How is this possibly my fault? Your husband," he yelled. "That stubborn old man." His portfolio was ancient. It was full of these slow, useless stocks. If I had had real capital, real growth assets to work with from the beginning, I could have built an empire. But I was working with scraps. I was trying to build a rocket ship with wood and nails. You and your precious, useless security. You held me back. You ruined me. It was the logic of a cornered narcissist. His failure could not possibly be his own. It had to be someone else's. And I, and my dead husband, were the most convenient targets. He had taken our fortress of security, stripped it for parts to build his fantasy, and was now blaming the quality of the stones for his inability to fly. The weeks that followed were a living hell. The word bankruptcy began to be whispered. Lawyers were called. The beautiful, expensive office was shuttered. The leased Tesla was repossessed. The world they had built was being dismantled, piece by painful piece. And with every new failure, their cruelty towards me grew. I was no longer even a convenient resource. I was a living, breathing symbol of their failure. I was the person whose house they were now trapped in, a house they could no longer afford to maintain. They stopped speaking to me altogether. They treated me with a cold, simmering contempt. My food was left on a tray outside my door, as if I were a prisoner. They were punishing me for their own mistakes. They needed a scapegoat, and I was the only one they had left. The final, devastating blow came in the form of a man from the bank. A foreclosure notice was served. The line of credit that Mark had sworn he would pay back in 6 months had been defaulted on, and the bank was coming to take my home. Arthur's home. Mark and Anna had to declare personal bankruptcy, And because I had co-signed on so many of their loans and credit cards, because my name was entangled in the wreckage of their finances, I had to declare bankruptcy as well. I, Catherine Vance, a woman who had lived her entire life in comfort and security, was, at the age of 79, officially, legally, bankrupt. I had nothing. The shame was a physical illness. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had lost everything my husband had ever worked for. It was during this time, in the depths of my despair, that I began to go through my husband's old things. Not for any financial reason. I believed there was nothing left, but just to feel close to him. I went through his old desk, his closets. I touched his clothes, his books. And in the back of his closet, in an old, dusty shoebox, I found a collection of his old business papers, old contracts, expired licenses, and a thick, leather-bound ledger. I almost put it back. It looked like just another boring business document. But something made me open it. The first page was titled, "In My Husband's Neat, Precise Hand, the Phoenix Account." I had never heard of it. I began to read. The ledger was a meticulous, handwritten record of a secret. A secret my brilliant, careful husband had kept for over 30 years. Early in his career, before we were even married, Richard had been a partner in a small engineering startup with his best friend. The company had been on the verge of success when his friend had betrayed him, pushing him out and taking all the patents. It was a brutal, devastating experience that had shaped his entire life. But what I never knew was that, in the legal settlement, Richard had not taken a cash payout. He had taken a small, seemingly worthless piece of the company's future profits. A contingency clause, he called it. The company had eventually been bought out by a larger corporation, and his small piece had been converted into an even smaller, almost forgotten piece of that corporation's stock. For 30 years, he had never touched it. He had never spoken of it. He had treated it like a dead asset, a reminder of a past failure. But he had logged it, here, in this secret book. And he had allowed the dividends to be automatically reinvested, year after year, decade after decade. It was his phoenix, he had written on the first page. The thing that might one day rise from the ashes. My hands were shaking. I didn't understand what I was looking at. But I saw the name of the brokerage firm where the account was held. A firm I had never heard of. I saw the account number. With a heart pounding with a hope I was afraid to feel, I took the ledger and I called my other son, the one who lived in New York, the one who had his father's head for business. I read him the account number. I asked him to find out what it was. He called me back an hour later. His voice was filled with a stunned disbelief. "Mom," he said, "are you sitting down? This Phoenix account, I don't know how Dad did it. It's not a small account. The stock it was in, it split, and then it split again. And the dividends, Mom, it's a fortune that no one knew existed. It was never part of the marital estate. It was never part of the assets you shared with Anna's husband. It's in Dad's name, and you are the sole direct beneficiary. Mom, you're not broke. You're a very, very wealthy woman." I dropped the phone. The world went silent. My husband, my quiet, brilliant Richard, had been betrayed once in his life, and he had spent the next 30 years building a secret, silent weapon, a financial fortress so deep, so hidden, that even he had probably forgotten its full power. He had built it to protect himself from the ghosts of the past, but in the end, he had built it to protect me from the predators of the present. The grief and shame that had been my constant companions vanished, burned away by a sudden, blinding light. The light of my husband's love, of his foresight, of his genius. And in that light, a new feeling began to grow. A cold, hard, and beautiful feeling. It was the feeling of power. Mark and Anna thought they had bankrupted me. They thought they had taken everything. They were about to find out that they had only succeeded in unlocking the vault. The bankruptcy proceedings for Mark's company, Innovate, were already underway. It was a worthless shell, deep in debt. Its assets, some office furniture, some computer equipment, and, most importantly, the intellectual property he believed was so valuable, were being put up for a public bankruptcy auction. No one was expected to bid. It was considered toxic. I picked up the phone and called my son in New York again. "I need you to help me set up a holding company," I said, and my voice was no longer the voice of a victim. It was the voice of a CEO. "Let's call it the Phoenix Group, and I need you to get me a seat at that auction." The 2 weeks leading up to the bankruptcy auction were the most intensely focused of my life. The grieving, confused widow was gone. In her place was Katherine Vance, chairman of the newly formed Phoenix Group, a holding company whose sole purpose was the execution of a single, deeply personal, and highly strategic acquisition. My son in New York, a man who had inherited his father's head for business, became my loyal lieutenant. He flew in immediately, his face a mixture of awe at his father's foresight and a cold fury at what had been done to me. "He never said a word, Mom," he kept repeating. For 30 years he never said a word. "Your father wasn't one for words," I told him. He was one for plans. And now, I was the executor of his final, most brilliant plan. Our first order of business was to quietly settle my own personal bankruptcy. With the immense untouched capital from the Phoenix account, my lawyer, a shrewd woman my son recommended, made the proceedings disappear. The debts were paid in full. The foreclosure on my home was canceled with a single wire transfer. The lines vanished. On paper, I was still the poor, bankrupt old woman. But in reality, the fortress my husband had built was quietly, secretly being restored to its full strength. While the lawyers handled the financial cleanup, I dedicated myself to the art of war. I was no longer an ignorant literature teacher. I was a student of my enemy. For days, I sat in my husband's library and I studied. My son brought me every document he could find on Mark's failed company, the business plans, the investor prospectuses, the financial statements. I began to see the story hidden in the numbers. It was a story of arrogance, of reckless spending, of a man who was brilliant at creating the illusion of success, but had no idea how to build a solid foundation. His company wasn't just a failure. It was a fraud, built on a bedrock of my money and his own self-delusion. He had talked about building a rocket ship, but all he had really built was a very expensive, very beautiful firework designed to dazzle for a moment before spectacularly exploding. But in my research, I found the one thing he had created that had real value. It was a single, elegant patent for a piece of software he had designed early on, before his ambition had outstripped his talent. It was a brilliant idea, a genuine innovation. But he had never had the patience or the capital to develop it properly. He had been too busy chasing bigger, flashier dreams. The patent, the one real jewel in his crown of sawdust, was now buried in the wreckage of his bankrupt company, listed as a minor asset. And I knew, with an engineer's certainty that I had inherited from my husband, that this was the key. The day of the auction arrived. It was held in a sterile, soulless conference room in a downtown law office. It was a pathetic affair. A few lawyers, a representative from the bank, and a handful of bottom-feeding investors who specialized in buying up the assets of dead companies for pennies on the dollar. And then there was Mark. He was there, as was his legal right. He looked like a ghost at his own funeral. He was thin, pale, his expensive suit hanging on him like a costume. He was there to watch the final, humiliating dismemberment of his life's dream. I did not attend myself. My presence was not required. The Phoenix Group was represented by my son and our lawyer. They were just another anonymous investment entity in the room. Mark saw my son, of course, and a flicker of confusion crossed his face. But he likely assumed he was there as a creditor, a representative of his bankrupted mother, there to pick over the scraps. The arrogance was so deeply ingrained in him, he could not imagine any other reality. He had no idea he was looking at the predator who had come to buy his bones. I listened to the auction over a speakerphone from the comfort of my husband's library. I heard the auctioneer begin, his voice a flat, bored monotone. He listed the assets: office furniture, computer equipment, servers. The bids were insultingly low. A few $1,000s for a room full of equipment that Mark had paid hundreds of thousands for. I could hear, In the silence between the bids, the sound of my son-in-law's world being ground into dust. And then, the final item came up. Item 7, the auctioneer said. The complete intellectual property portfolio of Innovate LLC, including all trademarks and patents, most notably, patent number 743B. He was auctioning off Mark's one great idea. His one real, tangible accomplishment. The bidding started at $1,000. One of the bottom feeders offered 2 IQ. Another offered 5 10. It was a pittance. They were buying it for scrap. And then my son, representing the Phoenix Group, spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, clear, and strong. $100,000, he said. The room went silent. I could feel the shock through the phone. It was an insane, illogical bid for a worthless patent from a failed company. The other bidders immediately folded. They thought the Phoenix Group was a fool, an amateur. 100,000, going once, the auctioneer said, his voice for the first time holding a note of interest. Going twice. I held my breath. And then, a new voice entered the fray. 150,000. It was Mark. He was bidding on his own company. He was using what little money he had left, perhaps money borrowed from his parents, to try to buy back the last remnant of his own soul. It was the most pathetic, most desperate act I had ever witnessed. My son's voice came again, without a moment's hesitation. 200,000, 250. Mark shot back, his voice ragged. This was no longer about business. It was about pride. It was a battle of wills. $300,000, my son said, his voice as calm and steady as his father's had ever been. There was a long, terrible silence. I could hear Mark's breathing on the other end of the phone, a ragged, desperate sound. He had nothing left. He had pushed all his chips in, and he had been beaten. He was broken. Going once, the auctioneer called out. Going twice, sold, to the Phoenix Group for $300,000. The gavel fell, and the company built on my ruin became my property. The aftermath of the auction was, for me, a period of quiet, intense work. For Mark, it was a descent into a new kind of hell. The Phoenix Group was now his primary creditor. We owned his debt. We owned his intellectual property. We owned what was left of his life. He tried to find out who we were, of course. His frantic calls to the auction house and the law firm were met with a polite, impenetrable wall of corporate anonymity. The Phoenix Group was a private entity that did not disclose its principles. For a man like Mark, who thrived on information and connections, the not knowing was a special kind of torture. He was being haunted by a faceless corporation, a ghost in the machine of his own failure. While he was reeling, I was building. I used the capital from the Phoenix account to do what he had never been able to do. I invested in his one good idea. I hired a small, brilliant team of real engineers, not the flashy, expensive ones he had hired to impress investors. I gave them one mission: take patent 743B and build it properly. For 6 months, we worked in secret, out of a small, nondescript office my son had rented. I was there every day. I was not a literature teacher anymore. I was the chairman of the board. I learned about coding, about user interface, about market strategy. I discovered, to my own profound surprise, that my husband's mind, his way of thinking, logically, meticulously, from the foundation up, was a part of me. I had absorbed it over 51 years of love and conversation. I wasn't just his widow. I was his partner, and I was finally getting to prove it. 6 months later, we were ready. We launched the product, a simple, elegant piece of software based on his patent. And it was a success. Not a flashy, explosive success, but a quiet, solid one. The kind of success my husband would have appreciated. It began to get attention in the tech world. The Phoenix Group was no longer an unknown entity. And that's when I decided it was time for the final meeting. I had my lawyer summon Mark to a creditors' meeting at our new office. He had no choice but to attend. I can only imagine what he thought as he walked into the lobby of the company that had bought his life's work out from under him. I had them show him to the boardroom. I was not there when he walked in. I had the new CEO, the young engineer I had hired to lead the team, begin the meeting. I watched on a monitor from my office next door. The CEO began the presentation, showing the success of the new product, the sales figures, the growth projections. Mark sat there, his face a gray mask of disbelief and envy. He was watching another man succeed with his idea, with his patent. And then, at the end of the presentation, the CEO said, "And now, I'd like to introduce you to the founder and chairwoman of the Phoenix Group, without whom none of this would be possible." The door to the boardroom opened, and I walked in. I have savored many moments in my life. The day I married my husband. The day my children were born. But the look on Mark's face in that moment is a memory I will treasure on my deathbed. It was a look of such profound, soul-shattering shock that it was almost comical. It was the look of a man seeing a ghost. Not a terrifying ghost, but a ghost in a power suit, holding a financial report. He leaped to his feet. "You!" he choked out. "It was you?" "Hello, Mark," I said, my voice calm and pleasant. I sat down at the head of the table. "My table. Please have a seat. We have so much to discuss." He just stood there, speechless, his mind collapsing under the weight of the impossible truth. The foolish, irrelevant old woman he had bankrupted, the woman he had dismissed and destroyed, had risen from the ashes of his failure, bought his company, and become his boss. "How?" he finally whispered. "My husband was a very careful man," I said. "He believed in fail-safes. It seems he knew, long before I did, that our family might one day need one. Anna, my daughter, was not there. Their marriage had not survived the bankruptcy. She had finally seen him for the hollow man he was. She had left him, taking their child, and had moved to be closer to me. Our relationship is a slow, careful process of rebuilding, but for the first time in years, I have my daughter back." Mark, however, had nothing. And now he was sitting in my boardroom, a debtor to the woman he had ruined. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice a pathetic thread. I looked at him, this man who had caused me so much pain, who had so thoroughly desecrated my husband's memory, and I felt nothing. No anger. No desire for more revenge. The game was over. I had already won. "I want nothing from you, Mark," I said. "You have nothing I want. Our business here is concluded. You are free to go." And I turned to my CEO and began to discuss our quarterly earnings. He just stood there for a long moment, a broken man in a room full of his own ghosts. Then he turned and walked out of the office, out of my company, and out of my life forever. I learned that the greatest weakness of arrogant people is that they never look down. They are so focused on the sky, on their grand ambitions, that they never see the quiet, steady work being done in the foundations. They never suspect that the person they've dismissed as being beneath them is the one who is quietly, patiently laying the groundwork for their downfall. I learned that true strength is not loud. My husband's strength was in his silence, in his meticulous planning, in a love so profound it planned for disasters he would never live to see. And I learned that you are never too old to start a new chapter. I was a literature teacher who became a CEO at the age of 79. They tried to write the final, tragic chapter of my life for me. But I took the pen back, and I wrote an epilogue they never saw coming. So, if you are out there, and you feel that your story is over, that you have been written off, remember me. Pick up the pen. You never know what kind of ending you might be capable of writing for yourself. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. Your presence has been a great comfort. If my story has inspired you, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and ringing that notification bell so we can continue to share these stories together. In the comments below, I would love to hear about a time you surprised yourself with your own strength and wrote a new chapter in your life. Love you all. This is Grandma Katherine, and I'll see you in the next story.